What if the truth you were seeking was hidden in the very faith you once questioned? This is not just the story of conversion. This is a story of sincere searching, a journey across three of the world's major religions, a deep dive into spirituality, and the transformation of a man who once bowed before statues but now bows to none but the one true God. In the multicultural world of Southeast Asia, where ancient Buddhist temples sit beside mosques and churches, a young boy was born into a Chinese Buddhist family. His name was Hussein Yi, though at the time no one called him that. He was simply Yi, a curious and spiritually sensitive child who found peace in the incense-filled halls of Buddhist monasteries. But even amid the chants and offerings, something in his soul whispered that the truth might be bigger, grander than anything he had yet known. From a very young age, Yi was not like other children. While others ran through the narrow alleys of his Malaysian neighborhood chasing kites and laughter, Yi sat cross-legged in quiet meditation. His parents, devout Buddhists, noticed his piety and commitment. He was taken regularly to the temple, where he eventually served as a temple aide. He swept the floors of the shrine, lit candles for worshippers, and absorbed the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama. Yi believed deeply in the Buddhist teachings, on the impermanence of life, the reality of suffering, and the path to nirvana through detachment. But while the rituals offered some solace, a yearning still stirred within him. He wanted to know, not just feel, not just follow. He craved certainty. In a home that hosted Buddhists, Taoists, and free thinkers, faith was fluid, but Yi's soul wasn't content with ambiguity. His older sister, who had embraced Christianity, introduced him to the Bible. The idea of salvation, the loving God, and the story of Jesus moved him. Christianity seemed freeing, a sharp contrast to the rigidity of Buddhist doctrine. So Yi walked into a church. The hymns were soothing, the message of forgiveness was compelling, and for a while he believed he had found what he was looking for. But then came the questions. When he tried to share Christianity with Muslim friends at school, they asked him things no pastor could fully answer. Why do you worship a man as God? Why three in one? Didn't Jesus prostrate to God? Yi didn't dismiss their questions. He researched them, and the more he researched, the more uncertain he became. Was Christianity built on the teachings of Jesus, or on interpretations that came after? It was 1968. One night, confused and exhausted, Yi whispered into the silence of his room, "Oh God, if you exist, guide me. I don't care what your name is. Just show me the truth." Days later, he stumbled upon a small Islamic booklet about a man named Umar ibn al-Khattab, a fierce opponent of Islam who became one of its strongest defenders after reading just a few verses of the Quran. That story lit a fire in Yi's heart. He had to know more. He searched for a Quran, not one handed to him, but one he found himself. When he read it, it didn't speak about God. It spoke as God, direct, unapologetic, powerful. The Quran said, "And we certainly sent into every nation a messenger." Quran 1636. Could it be, Yi wondered, that Buddha himself was once a messenger, a prophet misinterpreted by time? What drew Yi most to Islam wasn't the rituals, it was the logic, the completeness, the precision. Here was a faith that didn't just ask him to believe, it challenged him to think. It didn't shun the world, it taught balance between the dunya, this life, and the akhira, the hereafter. It gave him answers, and those answers led him to the one God. Eventually he embraced Islam and became Muhammad Hussein Yi. It was not a conversion, it was a return to the clarity his soul had always sought. Embracing Islam wasn't a simple switch for Hussein Yi, it was a seismic shift. In a society where cultural identity is deeply tied to religion, becoming Muslim as a Chinese Malaysian was not just unusual, it was controversial. He faced questions, ridicule, even ostracization from some of his own family members. To them, Islam was foreign, perhaps even threatening, tangled in political narratives and unfamiliar rituals. But for Yi, Islam wasn't an alien concept. It was the key that unlocked the questions he had buried for years. His transition wasn't fueled by emotions alone, it was intellectual. He devoured Islamic literature, not to be convinced, but to test it. He listened to debates, sought out scholars, and questioned everything. And to his surprise, Islam invited that scrutiny. It welcomed inquiry. The Quran didn't ask him to blindly believe. It challenged him to use his reason. It was this intellectual rigor, combined with a spiritual depth he hadn't found elsewhere, that cemented his faith. As he learned Arabic, The words of the Quran became even more alive. It was as though the text was speaking directly to him, bypassing centuries of commentary and translation, reaching his heart with raw clarity. He began to see the thread that connected all prophets, from Abraham to Moses, from Jesus to Muhammad, peace be upon them all. They all preached the oneness of God, the accountability of man, and the promise of an afterlife. It wasn't about changing religion, it was about recognizing the original message that had echoed across time and civilizations. Yi began to pray. Slowly, at first. Awkwardly, in a language he was still learning. But each movement, each verse grounded him. For the first time, worship didn't feel like ritual, it felt like communion, not with idols, not with intermediaries, but with the Creator himself. He no longer bowed before statues carved by human hands. He bowed only to the one who had carved the universe. But it wasn't just about personal peace. Yi felt a responsibility to share what he had discovered, not as a missionary, but as someone who had found clarity and wanted others to know it existed. He knew the stereotypes, he understood the fear and misinformation surrounding Islam. That's why he committed himself to dawah, to interfaith dialogue, to education. Not to convert, but to clarify, not to judge, but to explain. In his early days as a Muslim, Yi faced challenges from within the Muslim community as well. His ethnicity, his former religious background, and his modern clothing sometimes caused suspicion, but instead of growing bitter, he focused on bridging gaps between cultures, between sects, and most importantly, between faith and understanding. He emphasized that Islam was not an Arab religion or a cultural identity, it was a universal message for humanity. Years later, as he stood before crowds in mosques, universities, and conferences, speaking fluently in English, Malay, and Arabic, people didn't just see a scholar, they saw a seeker-turned-guide, a man who had walked through the shadows of doubt and emerged into light. His lectures weren't lofty or abstract. They were rooted in experience, laced with compassion, and grounded in sincerity. But perhaps the most powerful part of his journey was this. Even after becoming a recognized Islamic teacher and public figure, Hussein Yi never stopped seeking. He continued to read, to travel, to ask questions, and to learn from others, because, as he often reminded his listeners, Islam wasn't the end of the journey, it was the beginning. His story is a testament to what happens when you pursue truth at any cost, when you let go of fear, of tradition, of societal pressure, and follow the path your soul has been calling you toward all along. As Hussein Yi immersed himself in the study of Islam, he began to realize that this newfound faith was not only transforming his beliefs, it was reshaping his entire worldview. Islam didn't ask him to forget his past, it gave him the lens to reinterpret it. The silence of the Buddhist monastery, the harmony in Christian hymns, and the questions he had once feared were now understood as stepping stones, divine preparations leading him to his purpose. Every prayer he had ever uttered, every doubt he had wrestled with, began to make sense in the light of Tawheed, the oneness of God. But with clarity came responsibility. Embracing Islam in the privacy of one's heart was one thing. Living it openly in a world of religious suspicion was another. Hussein Yi now stood at the crossroads of multiple identities, Chinese by ethnicity, Malaysian by nationality, Muslim by faith. Each identity came with its own baggage, and reconciling them wasn't always easy. In the eyes of many non-Muslim Chinese Malaysians, he had betrayed his culture. In the eyes of some Muslims, especially in conservative circles, he was still the convert, a perpetual outsider, no matter how much he learned or how sincerely he believed. Yet he persisted, with grace, with patience, and with unwavering resolve. He enrolled in the Islamic University of Medina in Saudi Arabia, one of the most prestigious centers of Islamic scholarship in the world. There he was no longer just a convert, he became a student among scholars. He studied under some of the most respected teachers of the time, mastering classical Arabic, Hadith sciences, Islamic jurisprudence, and theology. For years he lived simply, absorbing knowledge, refining his understanding, and preparing himself to return not just as a believer but as a teacher. When he came back to Southeast Asia, the landscape had changed. Islam was growing rapidly in the region, but with that growth came questions, confusion, and sometimes extremism. Hussein Yi saw it all, not as a crisis, but as a call. He dedicated himself to dawah, inviting others to Islam, focusing especially on new Muslims and those interested in converting. He knew their questions because he had once asked them. He understood their fears because he had once felt them. Through his lectures, TV appearances, and interfaith dialogues, he made Islam accessible without diluting it. He spoke about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, not as a distant historical figure, but as a living example of mercy, humility, and wisdom. He explained the pillars of Islam not as mechanical rituals, but as a holistic system for a balanced life. He clarified misconceptions about jihad, women's rights, and religious coexistence with a calmness that disarmed even the harshest critics. But perhaps most notably, Hussein Yi never confined himself to the podium. He walked with the youth, sat with struggling families, visited prisons, and listened to those who had no one else. He believed that Dawah wasn't just in words, it was in presence, in empathy, in service. His authenticity became his greatest strength, and yet even as his influence grew, he remained deeply humble. He often reminded audiences that he was not a scholar by bloodline or tribal status. He was just a man who had searched sincerely for the truth. And in finding it, he had found not only God, but himself. Still, challenges persisted. As a public figure, he was not immune to controversy. Critics from all sides emerged, some from within the Muslim community who feared his interfaith approach blurred boundaries, and others from outside who accused him of abandoning his heritage. But Hussein Yi stood firm, not with arrogance, but with clarity. He made it known, truth is not inherited, it is discovered, and once discovered, it must be lived, regardless of the cost. Through his work with Al-Qadem, the foundation he established, he continues to mentor, educate, and support Muslims and non-Muslims alike. He doesn't speak to impress, he speaks to connect. His speeches aren't performances, they are conversations between hearts. For Hussein Yi, Islam was never just a destination. It was a way of life, a journey back to the fitra, the pure and natural state that God places in every human soul, a return to simplicity, a return to purpose. Hussein Yi's journey reflects a deeper human story, the universal thirst for truth. In a world with countless belief systems, how does one discern divine guidance from cultural tradition? From East Asia to the Middle East, from meditation mats to prayer rugs, humans are searching. And Hussein Yi's story reminds us that the answer is not found in culture, but in revelation. As a Muslim leader, Sheikh Hussein Yi didn't shy away from uncomfortable questions. He publicly suggested that religious figures like Buddha and Jesus may have been prophets of God, misunderstood over time by their followers. He emphasized that Islam doesn't ask people to abandon truth, it asks them to refine it, to strip it of human addition and return it to its divine core. His leadership wasn't always welcome. Some critics accused him of blending religions, but his message was clear. Islam is not a contradiction of previous faiths, it is their fulfillment. So what does it mean to be a seeker? It means walking away from the comfortable. It means asking questions that shake your soul. It means daring to admit that you don't know and being brave enough to find out. Sheikh Hussein Yi's life is not just a biography, it's a map. From the incense-laced temples of Buddhism to the hymn-filled pews of Christianity and finally to the prostration of Islam, his story reminds us that truth survives distortion and that those who truly seek it will find it. With that said, thanks for watching, and until the next script, may your journey for truth never stop.